All right, problem number 3, phase shifts. So now we're looking at what happens when you add or subtract something inside the parentheses, adding or subtracting from that x term. We'll think about what happens when you do that to any other function like x squared. If you have x minus 4, quantity squared, what does that do? It moves it to the right 4. Well, in this first one, we have x plus pi over 4, so what is that going to do? It is going to shift it to the left by pi over 4. So the very first thing I'm going to do to start this is I am going to label one full period, 4 tick marks away from the origin. Now the normal period of a sine graph is 2 pi. This has no coefficient in front of the x term, so this will have a normal period. So 2 pi. And then what I do is I go 2 tick marks, because that is halfway to 2 pi, therefore it is pi. And then I go 1 tick mark, because that is halfway to pi, therefore it is pi divided by 2. And if I go to the third tick mark, well, that's 3 pi over 2 tick marks, so that is 3 pi over 2. Now I have those labeled, but my phase shift, notice, is pi over 4 to the left. So if my tick marks here all represent pi over 2's, then pi over 4 has to be halfway in between. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to label all these pi over 4 tick marks. Halfway in between is my pi over 2 tick marks. Because now all I have to do is show a normal sine graph, but all of the important pieces are going to occur on those green tick marks because it's a normal sine graph that has been shifted to the left by a factor of pi over 4. So I can start my sine graph there. Sine starts at its middle value at 0, and then it runs through its cycle going up. And all of these tick marks have to occur on these green pi over 4 lines. That is what that shift of pi over 4 is doing to me. So notice everything is pretty much exactly the same. I'm just starting at a different location on the x-axis. And there we go. I have one full cycle of my sine graph. Let's go ahead and do the same thing now with this cosine graph here. Cosine of x minus pi. So just as before, I'm going to go 4 tick marks away and label a full period. So 2 pi, pi, pi over 2, and 3 pi over 2. But now my phase shift is pi to the right, right? If it's subtracting pi, then if I plug in pi for x, I get 0, so this is going to be pi to the right. So let's go ahead and start my cosine graph, not at the x value of 0, but at the x value of pi. And what does cosine start with? Well, cosine starts at its maximum value. So I'm going to start at the top, and then I go down, and then I go down again. And I could go back up like that, and I can also work backwards in the other direction, getting myself back to the origin like that. And then my cosine graph is going to look something like that. And there you have it. I have a cosine graph. Remember, keep in mind, essentially all I've done is changed the starting point. I started at that value right there. There are my two graphs.